Welcome back to my YouTube channel, everybody. My guest today is Mr. Tom Coyle, who's a retired NCIS special agent, even if the agency had a different name back then at the time of the events we're going to discuss today. And together with Tom, we'll talk about the Iran-Contra case. Thanks for your time, Tom. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Leonardo. Very happy to be joining you. Appreciate the chance to explain a not a very well understood part of our history.
Well, before we start, let's recap what happened with Iran-Contra, because I think that a lot of people don't know, because a lot of the people watching this video were not even born at the time of the events. So basically in the mid-80s, I think it was 85 and 86, the US government were selling missiles to the Iranian government as a ransom for the release of hostages that were detained by criminal groups allied with Iran, and the money coming from selling these missiles were diverted to a rebellious group in Nicaragua who were fighting against the Soviet government of Nicaragua. Both these things were forbidden, and the main character of all this story is a US Army colonel by the name of Oliver North, and we will be talking about this person extensively during this interview. And this is what happened in a nutshell. So before we start, Tom, would you like to tell us how come you're so knowledgeable about this story and the very unique angle that you have to share with us?
Yeah, it's having lived through it, it didn't strike me as particularly unique, but of course it is in the context of time and being in the right place at the right time. But Leonardo, understand that a big part of the story is the fact that Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. The Marine Corps has a unique approach to war fighting, and it can be summarized, and I'll get to it in a minute, but it can be summarized by saying lead, follow, or get out of the way. And Oliver North personified that in so many ways that we'll discuss here in a few minutes. But yeah, I was with Fairfax County, Virginia Police Department, heard about an opportunity in 1983 with Naval Investigative Service, which was known as back then, didn't change names until 1991. So I applied and was accepted for service as a special agent and moved to Norfolk, Virginia from the DC area to accept employment there. And 18 months later, transferred to Okinawa, Japan for assignment. And I had some, along with some of my colleagues, some protective service training, some special training that made me eligible for assignment in that regard. So the Navy learned from Headquarters Marine Corps that, or NCIS headquarters learned that Headquarters Marine Corps wanted some NIS agents to protect Lieutenant Colonel North, who there reportedly was a threat on his life from a terrorist group, Abu Nidal. And so I was dispatched from Okinawa, Japan, on about a 24-hour trip back to Washington, D.C., and was one of a group, probably 3 handfuls of agents. I'm not going to say the number of agents, but it was 3 shifts, and I was a shift leader, and so got to know Colonel North quite well during the course of that. I want to say it was a 60-day assignment.
Well, before we go through our questions, we can also mention something of what you do now, because you're a speaker about leadership, and you have a website and an association called Leadership for Life. Do you want to say something about it?
Yeah, just briefly. I experienced got a lot of good leaders in life, but also a few duds who were more self-absorbed and narcissistic than really anything else. And leadership has always been a popular topic for my reading. My dad, a naval officer in the Korean War, spoke to us kids a lot about leadership. I have a son-in-law who's a senior leader with the FBI. I have another, our son is currently serving as a Marine Lieutenant Colonel. So the 3 of us talk routinely about leadership. It's just always been an interest area for me. And last year I was a visiting lecturer at UVA in Charlottesville talking about law enforcement leadership, because today it's so essential to have good leaders who are inspiring and trusting and transparent and empathetic. And we don't have enough of those leaders. So I'm on a one-man mission to try to change that one group at a time.
That's magnificent. So first off, thanks a lot for what you do. So let's get to the main topic of this discussion. What was Oliver North's role in deciding and planning the selling of missiles to Iran and the diversion of money to the Contras?
Well, that's a great, Leonardo, that's a great question. I can give you some general answers. If you read all the extant literature about it, Colonel North wrote a book. There's a lot of Wikipedia information out there, and it's on a very good day, it's extremely complicated, many faceted, a lot of opinions out there about just what role he played, how large or small it was. I will tell you that it's my sort of thinking on the matter over 30 years that, I would point out to you that his seniors, Bud McFarlane, who was the National Security Advisor, he resigned, and then Admiral Poindexter, a Navy 3-star, took over. And I think that perhaps a dearth of senior level leadership at the NSC, combined with Colonel North's can-do approach, and that's typical Marine Corps can-do approach and attitude, resulted in a lot of shall we say initiatives during the course of Iran-Contra that are not normally associated with a Marine Lieutenant Colonel NSC staffer. So he played, we can say, an outsized role in policy decisions, again, not normally the province of a Marine Lieutenant Colonel. And I think just because Oliver North was and is a very persuasive, charismatic, charming, just a super great guy. Again, I got to know him quite well. He taught me how to shuck oysters in the back of his porch in Great Falls, Virginia. He could not have been more gracious to our team of special agents there to protect him under fairly arduous circumstances. We worked out of a small trailer on his property. He had a little horse farm in Great Falls. And so it was not the easiest of assignments, but he made it easy for us because, again, very gracious guy, intensely patriotic, which really was at the root of a lot of this. So it's a perfect storm, I think, Leonardo, with things that he perceived as needed doing, combined with a real forward-leaning personality like he is, combined to have some real bad missteps, I guess you could say. The Boland Amendment passed by Congress, to your point, specifically prohibited any exchange, anything like that. So he did mislead Congress. He was found guilty of it, but later pardoned. So it's a fairly complicated piece, but the piece that I want to emphasize for your viewers is just what a loyal and dedicated Marine Colonel North was during the course of his career. He earned the Silver Star in Vietnam. So he was a decorated Marine combat vet. So he knew what the score was, you could say.
Well, at the time when all of this was going on, all this exchanges of missiles and money between Iran and Nicaragua, was President Reagan aware of what was going on, as far as you know?
That's a good question. It's my sense that he was not. I could be wrong, but if I had to guess, President Reagan was a great leader, and he delegated an awful lot of national security decisions to the infrastructure there at the White House called the National Security Council. It's not clear if they were allowed to be policy implementers or not, but the NSC, under the leadership of Poindexter and Bud McFarland before him, got more actively involved in executing policy as opposed to dreaming up policy. So there's in the executive branch of government, you have the executors of policy, armed services, so the one-star general on the ground in pick a place does not decide policy for the United States military. He's there to execute it along with his colonels and the majors and the captains and so forth. So Colonel North, his position is normally associated with policy implementation as opposed to policy creation and execution and implementation. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. But let me ask you the other side of this question. How much did he share with his direct bosses there?
I would tell you that the training and culture of the Marine Corps and the Officer Corps is to share everything. Did he do that on a daily basis or periodically? My sense is he probably did. Did he leave out some of the dirtier details? He could have to protect the boss. There's some of that in there too. The way governments work, not just the U.S. government, loyal subordinates sometimes purposely don't inform the boss about controversial or complicated decisions to protect them from any negative blowback later.
Well, but as far as you know, President Reagan even know that this Oliver North guy existed?
I don't think he did actually until all this blew up, right? But he didn't know. He would no more know of the existence of Colonel North than he would know, a lot of information about his Secret Service driver or the guy that works on Marine One, the helicopter. So he was not a cabinet member person. He was a staffer assigned to the White House and ostensibly there to perform staff work, which, as I noted, includes policy coordination and execution, not policy creation itself. It's the execution part that I assume was his duty, but as the head of the NIS shift for that, I did not talk with a colonel about that, did not talk any detail about that, but I can tell you he was very, very well prepared for the hearings, the congressional hearings, the Iran-Contra hearings. He studied hours and hours every day at the law offices where we had our own room to coordinate security for him. And so he was a very good and compelling witness. If you've seen the video, America responded with great pride, I think, in the fact that he was sort of standing up to Congress. The reality is a lot more complicated, but he looked pretty good in the uniform. And I think Headquarters Marine Corps was wishing this whole thing would go away because there's one of their senior Marines testifying on Capitol Hill. It was just not a good look for the Marine Corps then or now.
Well, I am not a professional reporter, of course, so I can only admire real journalists. And these days, the most famous journals are, the Western ones, such as New York Times, Washington Post, and so on. But we have something weird going on in this case because the first ones to find out were not Western reporters, but a Lebanese newspaper. As far as you know, how can that happen?
Well, I did some more thinking about it, did a little bit of research on it, and it looks like we were working, or Colonel North was working with the British government, and he had some meetings with different influencers and sources of information in London. And if I had to guess, the leak came out of a Iranian connection in London and leaked it back that way.
Okay, that's why. This definitely
Yeah,
makes sense and
that's the
explains
only
everything.
way that's the only way it can make any sense, I think.
Well, and at a certain point after this thing came up to the press, there was an interesting moment where Oliver North and his secretary, Von Hall, tried to destroy the documents and even destroyed the documents to the point of jamming the shredder. And Von Hall even concealed some of the documents that they couldn't destroy under her blouse and in her boots. What happened here? Do you know anything more?
Um, I was not one bit surprised to come to understand that, to hear about it, and later to read about it. It's completely consistent with how things were done back in the day before presidential memos requiring documents not be shredded if they have some value, whether it's prosecutorial value or historic value. I do know that there's an even chance that CIA Director Casey, who died right in the middle of all this, we ended up taking him to Casey's funeral. But Director Casey may well have suggested to Colonel North, and they were friendly, Colonel, you may want to think about shredding some of these documents. I'm not saying that did happen, didn't happen, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility. And so Fawn Hall, a loyal subordinate to Colonel North, did what she was told to do.
Well, let's get to the congressional hearings. How did he behave once this hearing started?
He behaved like somebody who he was very charismatic personality. He came across very well on TV, and I think he was honest and direct with the congressional committee when they asked him at some point, "Did you tell the truth about your previous dealings?" He said no. So I don't think Americans today can fault him for employing one of my favorite Marine Corps adages, which I just noted, which is lead, follow, or get out of the way. And he felt like there was a lack of execution in some of this Iran-Contra business, and he did as he was trained to do. And I think that came out in the testimony. We at one point, I sat right behind him. We kind of rotated agents in and out because very tight quarters in there, and there's almost no threat to his personal safety inside one of those rooms, obviously. But I thought he acquitted himself very, very well.
But if I remember well, he took the Fifth Amendment for a long time, didn't he?
I'm not sure how many times he invoked his right to not speak, which is all Americans' right under the Fifth Amendment, but I think he did it just enough to give the Washington Post and others a lot of sort of titillating story, maybe. But he's a very sober-minded, intelligent Marine officer who knew what he was talking about and knew what he thought he could say on a public. This was not a closed door. This was an open to the public via TV hearing. And so some of this stuff was embarrassing for the executive branch, not to mention the congressional branch of government, but North acquitted himself well. I didn't watch most of his testimony because I was busy coordinating different aspects of his travel back to headquarters Marine Corps from downtown DC and to Casey's funeral and things like that. So we were fairly busy. We had no admin support. We did it all ourselves. But the colonel could not have made it more or easier for us. He could not have been any more gracious in helping us help him, if that makes sense.
It does, of course it does. But in your opinion, was he aware or was he feeling that he did something wrong? Because as we said, it took the Fifth Amendment for quite a while, and he also destroyed some of the documents. So what did he think he did something justifiable?
Yeah, that's a super good question. I've had the luxury of many years now to ponder that question, and my sense is that he thought he did the right thing. I never asked him because it wasn't in my lane to do so. So, Colonel, if you had to do this whole Iran-Contra thing again, would you do anything differently? I never asked him that question because, again, not my lane, and I didn't think it was appropriate to ask. I'd be curious to know what he would say today about it. But it's my sense, being an expert, interviewer and interrogator back in the day, it's my sense that he thought he was doing everything right.
Okay, that's my opinion too. But let's get to the main question here. Why did this all happen? I think that we have three options here. Was it lack of leadership? Was it President Reagan delegating too much? Or was what happened the lesser of the evils?
I think I don't know about the lesser of the evils, but I think it was a perfect storm that intersected that year or two when Colonel North was transferred to the NSC, combined with President Reagan's most senior cabinet members in strong disagreement about what the heck to do about Iran, what the heck to do about Sandinista. What they were just pulling their hair out, trying to figure out the right course of action. And of course, from their point of view, Congress did not help matters, but probably impeded it. But that's how a three-branch of government democracy works on its best day. And so I think there was a lack, as I indicated before, I think there was a lack of a strong leadership at the NSC. And then you combine that with a very forward-leaning in the foxhole Marine Lieutenant Colonel like Oliver North, who was so charming and so affable. And when he asked people to do stuff, they didn't ask any questions. They just did it. And I think if you'd had another personality in there, Leonardo, less affable and less charismatic, this whole damn thing might not have happened.
Well, leadership is also about delegation, but probably in this case, President Reagan went too far.
Well, that's a good question. He's the man responsible, as President Truman liked to say with that little sign on his desk, "The buck stops here." It stopped there with the president because he's the elected official. Poindexter was not an elected official. Nobody on the NSC was elected official. Cabinet members are appointed and then approved by the Senate, consent of the Senate. So maybe there was a lack of leadership on the part of Secretary of State and Defense, Weinberger, and I can't remember the state, Schultz. But, they're in charge of thousands and thousands and thousands of bureaucrats at just one department in DC, and the NSC is only a few hundred people. Admiral Poindexter was the nominal boss of North. So did he exercise the appropriate level of leadership and delegation? It would appear probably not. Did President Reagan delegate too much authority? And my personal belief on that is he did not.
Okay.
He did not. You can't possibly, if you're the president. Remember, Jimmy Carter was accused of, when he was president one term, accused of approving who got to play in the White House tennis court. So you have one, it's a micromanager, and the other is the opposite. You got to find a happy medium in there somewhere. I don't think President Reagan, I think he managed a very complex bureaucracy in the best way he could. And he later apologized on national TV to the American people about it. He said, "It's my fault. I'm responsible and nobody else." So good for him.
Well, at the end of all this story, all the charges against Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North were dismissed. How come? What happened?
Well, not being an attorney, I can only speculate from my seat watching it. And I think what happened was that he was granted immunity by the Congress to provide full and complete testimony, and then later was indicted by a grand jury in D.C., I guess, and then later convicted. There was a mugshot taken of him in civilian clothes. But later, I think it was the D.C. Court of Appeals vacated the judgment, saying that his testimony called into question the fairness of it, and so I am glad that the convictions were vacated, or yeah, I guess that's the best word to use. I just don't think that it was fair to have a low-level staffer be convicted of things that senior people either had knowledge of or should have knowledge of.
Well, Tom, many thanks again for your time and for your very precious explanations. I just would like to specify that this is by far the craziest and most complex case I've ever studied. I've been a blogger and a YouTuber.
You're 100% right.
Years.
It's right. And, here we are, 35 years later, and you can read until next Friday the 10 books about it, the Wikipedia files ad nauseum, and you're still going to get a wide variety of what happened, or why did it happen. It's just my sort of speculation, again with the benefit of time, is that this perfect storm interacted together. North's personality combined with an NSC that was in a state of flux because one leader left, Bud McFarland, also a Marine Lieutenant Colonel, when he retired, but came on later as a national security advisor. He left. I can't remember why. Admiral Poindexter, who was, I think, an intelligence officer by trade, he came in. So his leadership style was different, I think, than what Colonel North was used to. And in the absence of an order telling him not to, I think Colonel North proceeded with all due vigor to do what he thought was right.
Yeah, and also because in this case, we have a lot of governments involved. We have the United States, we have Iran, yes, we have Nicaragua, we have Lebanon, we have Israel. So it's so complex. I've studied a lot of crazy things over the last 20 years in my part-time job as a reporter, but this is by far the most complex.
I could not agree more. I like to think I have a pretty good handle on how our government works. But this case, or this affair, reigns supreme as the number one most complicated, most sort of counterintuitive in many respects. And to your point, the number of governments, sovereign nations involved in all this just makes it that much more complicated. It really does.
Definitely. Okay, before closing this video, I would like to remind everybody to go check Tom's website so that you can get a glimpse of his activity today as a speaker. His website is called Leadership for Life, and I'll leave the link to this website in the description of this video so you can find it below this video itself. Thanks for your time, Tom.
Leonardo, I appreciate it very much. You're very gracious to host me. I'm looking forward to hearing from a few of your viewers, but in the meanwhile, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks everybody else for watching this, and see you all next time. Bye-bye.